Welcome to another edition of the Destinations Podcast with Doni Aldine. I'm your host, Doni Aldine, and today we're here with Patricia Rain, who is a beauty columnist for Cultursmag, the global multicultural magazine that focuses on multi-ethnic, multicultural, mixed race, and geographically mobile people like immigrants, refugees, and third culture kids. So Patricia herself, her family is from Haiti, and she grew up in Florida. She's going to tell us about that journey, the cross-cultural journey, what it was like growing up, what it's like being in a family that's different than the surroundings around you, and all the good cross-cultural things. So, here we go. Hello.
Hello, everyone. I'm Patricia Rain. Thank you so much for having me. And even as you were giving that introduction, literally the first thing that came to mind that I realized that we don't get to talk about enough is, especially me being first generation born American, the differences that I went within my family, because it's like this little American child, like, how do we raise her?
Yes.
You know, and so there were things culturally that they did not understand, but yet I went to school here in Florida, obviously, but so no one talks about that element as well.
Yes. I mean, it's a big reason why Cultures is around. We talked about this a little bit ago. The reason for this space is we don't get to discuss these things. The people in majority culture, it doesn't matter what color they are, they literally don't care about these things.
They're like, what?
What are you talking about? You know, one of the beauties of my job, well, now as CEO of Cultures, but before as editor-in-chief, is people would constantly say, oh my God, I didn't think anybody cared, or they'd be crying or sending emails like, there's a place where I fit, there's a place where someone listens, there's a place where I belong, there's a place where I matter. There's so many things that we suppress and don't realize that we suppress because you're trying to fit into the majority, right? And so one conversation you and I had was how the in-between cultural spaces, so people who have a foot in two or more cultures, are marginalized by marginalized communities in the same way that the majority community typically marginalizes marginalized communities.
Which is wild.
So we're the marginalized of the marginalized,
Yes.
right? And yes, it is wild. And to be able to discuss it, because your family is different too. If your parents, so as you know, I'm Trinidadian, Costa Rican, parents come from one place. My little brothers, like you, were born in the U.S. Now, my older brother and I lived around the world, but my little brothers lived in Trinidad just for a little tiny bit. So they're not very Trinidadian. They're very American. And it was so interesting watching them grow up, because the things that were just inherent to us that they would give my mom a hard time about. And we were like, what is wrong with you? Hey, dude, if you want to have an easy time, you need to do this, this, and this. And then I was like, you with all that American stuff. They're like, but why? It's not fair. I was like, oh my God.
It's hilarious. Because it's like, you know, you adapt it differently. One thing I am thankful for growing up, my mom was so adamant about taking us to Haiti growing up. So from the age of 2, I would go, and we would go every 2 years. And I look at it now, how disconnected I would have been had we not gone.
1,000%.
Because it really...
Especially to keep going. It's one thing, like my younger brothers, to go for a period of time, but to keep going back and really have that while in your formative years,
right,
instilled into who you are. That's, I think, super important. And it changes your viewpoint.
Right. And I just think about, you know, they'd probably judge me more, my family, because I'd be even more unaware of certain things. So sometimes they're like, how do you know that? I'm like, you guys forget I'm Haitian too?
Because they only see you as American.
Right. I'm like, I'm Haitian too. Stop it.
My Trinidadian family calls me Yankee.
Okay.
So I'll give you one of those Yankees. I'm like, okay.
I thought only Haitians were friends.
No. At least we're not gringos. That's over in Costa Rica. I'm a gringo. It's not just white people.
And see, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's not them.
And it's amazing how, like, the things you don't know within the culturally different spaces either.
Yeah. So you say they would have how did you put it? Made more fun of me? Is that what you said?
Yeah, they'd make more fun of me.
So tell me why you think that. Like, tell me what it's like now. Wait, well, let's stop. Rewind. Go back. How did you grow up? Tell us how you grew up.
So, in a real Caribbean household, and what that means for the Haitian community is obviously a lot of our family are, moving from Haiti, trying to find a better life. So there's always like a house full of us, and there's always, a lot of us. There's somebody always is home. Someone's always home. Someone's always just coming into town. And, so I grew up a lot with that. And I didn't realize how much, I didn't have like a separate room, or because, we had relatives who were on visas and they would come in and, want to start growing up. But now I really appreciate it because it really allowed me to, I had to translate for them on like connecting American things to the Haitian stuff. So it made me grow up a lot faster, and even it also made me, which is why I'm the way I am now, I go into spaces and ask so many questions because my mom would always like, all right, go find. I'm like, I'm 8.
I'm 8 years old. Why? How did I become?
Why am I the translator? I'm like, does no one else understand what was just said? Is it the 8-year-old? But it really sharpened me in a way that I appreciate now. But when I was in it, I did not. Like, I'm like, I would be like, no other kids.
And I think that's normal for that, especially for a first generation who's born in another country, right? A lot of kids end up being, negotiating contracts, explaining to their parents what different legal documents say, all the things, just all the things. A friend of mine, we were talking the other day, he was born in Tamaulipas, Mexico, and his parents, he said to me one day, he's like, my parents are illiterate. And I said, in English or in Spanish? And he said, in both. I was like, okay. It was hilarious, but it was a real big insight into how he and his siblings had to be growing up, right?
Over through those spaces.
Exactly.
I wouldn't even thought to ask the question, illiterate in which language?
In English or in Spanish. Because they've been here since he was like 13 and he's like almost 50 now. And yeah, it was a moment.
Yeah, man. And so that's why I'm so thankful to have a chance to be a part of Cultures because, when you, similar to what you said, is that a lot of people don't realize certain things until, you're asked certain questions. And even in this short time span, the conversations we've had, it made me realize like, wow, we really don't talk much about these experiences from, this standpoint. Right. So, we grew up with a lot of us cousins, we all lived together. And, I remember asking my mom, because my maternal grandmother was the first to come to the United States. Okay. And so she went from Haiti to the Bahamas, spent some time in the Bahamas, and then she would help people get to the United States. And then one day a guy said to her, like, you're always helping everyone else. Why aren't you trying to go on the voyage? And if you know anything about South Florida, a lot of us come in on the boat, because it's so close. And so there were 3 attempts to get to the United States from the Bahamas. And what happened is, if you've seen on the news, sometimes the boats have too many people or they get lost because they don't have any sense of navigation. And so my mom was telling me, my grandmother shared, they ended up in Cuba. But there were too many people on the boat, so the amount of food and water that they had was not enough. And so the Cubans were the ones who gave them more food and gave them more water, and then they ended up back in the Bahamas. So it wasn't until my grandmother's 3rd attempt that she successfully made it too. And so I'm like, well, Mom, when they get to, South Florida, how do people know? She's like, word gets out that a boat was found.
So it's not like, okay.
Yes.
So it's not like like Ellis Island where they were processed, they came in and actually, they really just come on a boat and just land on the shore and start walking on the land.
Yes. And I said, so how do you know? And word gets around that there was a boat found near Miami or near so-and-so, and someone will come and just kind of like give them food, give them a place to stay. And I use those stories and I said, how dare I be afraid to like step into my greatness where you have a group of people who came, didn't speak the language, didn't know anything about where they are geographically. And then later on, you know, I can say we're fortunate because we ended up going to private school.
Right.
You know, people saw me as privileged. Like, you're in private school. I'm like, is it a privilege?
Well, you know, that's a thing too. Yes, is it I totally get where you're going with that. It's interesting, and that's out of that, I hear that a lot. But I think part of it, being international and thinking differently than, say, someone in the United States, right there, people already assume privilege. So, but one of the things I love about your story is that's, you know, having taught this and having a class on 21st century cultural diversity, it's not always privilege. It's privilege because you're looking through your lens in the United States of how you grew up. And, oh, wow, you've been here, or you grew up there, or you did this. I didn't get to do that, so it's privilege. But I'm like, they were in Cuba first and had no food and had to come back. So they see the privilege parts, but they don't see the challenge that comes with it as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, because my mom shared that my grandmother was saying to them, like, hey, I think we're lost. And, you know, the guys were like, we're not lost. And so my mom says my grandmother was telling her she had a dream.
Like the men? Or?
The men, literally. The men are like, we're not lost.
We don't need a map.
You know, men.
I guess that's universal.
No matter what culture. We're always right, men. Okay? Get it through your brains. So you know, Caribbean people were known for dreams, and you know, so my grandmother has a dream, and it's very vivid in the dream. Like, y'all are lost. Like, you need to tell
the angel was like, look,
y'all need to turn this thing around. You don't have any more food. It's about to be real crazy.
Wow.
And so, to your point, you know, people don't hear those stories enough. And that's why being a part of this is such a blessing, because I think just even, you know, I think within the cultures, there's things that don't get talked about.
Exactly. You know, the first time I ever heard, I mean, I think I was like 45. I didn't find all of this. I started doing my research, I think it was like 32, and my mind was blown. I mean, the Third Culture Kid book, when it was introduced to me, Third Culture Kids Living Among Worlds, and I read that book, and then the author became my mentor. She's still my mentor. And my mind was blown because I thought things that were quirks of my personality, I now realize they're actually part of my culture. My culture is being a an adult third culture kid. So people who grew up like me, it doesn't matter if you were born in Russia and you grew up in Spain and went to school in Africa, or I say a whole continent, went to school in Nairobi and then ended up living in Colombia. That's the same culture, especially the part, your formative years, where you actually were growing up and learning how to be in the world. That's the same culture as someone who was born in Argentina and moved to the United States in grade school, and then maybe at age 10 ended up in France, and whatever the case. Doesn't matter how it comes together. It's the whole mobility, the geographic mobility, and learning to be stable when the ground beneath you is shifting constantly. That creates certain traits that are part of this culture. So... And it's universal. I mean, the studies have shown it over and over and over. So it was really interesting and crazy for me that I read this book and I'm like, my mind is blown. Like, holy goodness, this is not my personality. This is my culture. And so it's interesting. Then fast forward, I'm 45, I'm teaching this, I'm all about it. I want everybody to find out, like all the people who don't know, to find their culture. So I don't.
You're like going on a book club, like
tour. Well, it was because, you know, it was just so shocking to me. There were so many revelations. And even within that, because I fit so many in between spaces, the amount of dimensionality that I have within my personhood is quite a bit. Barack Obama has a lot. Our editor-in-chief, John, who's Asian Latino, he has a lot. He's also a TCK. All the things. Like, we have all these dimensions within the cross-culturalness. So it was interesting after doing all the research, being excited and really wanting other people to feel what I felt when I found this out, right? Instead of blowing it off, which is what I did before. I just didn't think anything of it. It's like, oh, well, I'm a quirky person. But someone said to me, oh, well, yeah, you were so lucky to have that privilege. I'll never forget. I stopped. They meant the privilege of traveling. I stopped and I looked and I said, really? I said, because I think the person who didn't get to grow up with their family or didn't know their grandparents or had to change schools every few years would not agree with you.
That's another conversation.
And her jaw dropped because she never considered that. Yeah. Or the refugee family that lost everything and had to... I just met... I was on the tram in Denver, Colorado, and this gentleman was trying to buy a ticket for the tram speaking Spanish. So I ended up talking to him. He was like 23 years old. He told me he's Venezuelan, walked through Mexico to get to walked. I was like, how long did that take? He said months. Walked through Mexico to get to the United States.
Well, similar to, I don't know if you remember what was happening about 2 years ago with the Haitians at the border between Texas and Mexico as well.
Yeah.
Well, they came from Haiti, Chile, and I'm like...
Chile.
Yes.
Wait, how?
Yes.
Did they walk from Chile?
Yes.
No.
And I've had the pleasure of meeting people who went through that recently, and it made me so emotional to know what they had to see. They saw people die in the water. And one of the things that the one guy shared that was so profound to me, it really changed my perspective on the things I complain about, because he said that there's parts of the water where the water is so murky that it kind of like, it absorbs you. And so that's how people, like pregnant women are walking. This guy said there was women who even had their children along the journey because of that walking and food. And I said, so how do you get through that? And he said, so what would happen is whoever went on the voyage before them, they left a rope that connected to the other side, and they would leave like shirts to kind of signal, letting them know you're going in the right direction. And the ropes were to hold them so that they wouldn't submerge in the water. I started crying when he said that. I was like, and he said the things, and with a child on his back. He's carrying his son, and I'm like, this is what people are avoiding because of everything that's happening in Haiti right now. People are escaping because of like, they're killing people left and right. And so I was like, wow, this is the voyage that you went on to be here right now. And he looked at me and he said, I remember thinking to myself, like, I'm not gonna make it.
I can totally understand that.
So it made me think about just like what I know about my grandmother coming, because there were people who came on boats who didn't make it.
Right.
Who drowned in the ocean.
Right.
And I'm just like, back to your point, is it still a privilege when you hear those, what was at stake?
And like anything, there are privileged parts. You know what I just came to the other day, as you're speaking, I want to give people other pictures to other places for them to picture as well. I mean, Ukraine, Syria, there's all over the world. This is happening constantly. We're living our good life, Right. We're not thinking about it. And there's other places and other people who don't get to experience what we're experiencing, right? On the positive side. But, now I forgot what I was going to say. We were talking about...
the voyages, like what people sacrifice to come and the privilege.
Yeah. Oh, so there's privileges and there's sacrifices, I think, in any kind of life, right? And I think when you look through your lens, you see the positive things, or sometimes people only see the negative things, right, of someone else's life. But in this case, when you hear, oh, you grew up in, because I usually, you and I were talking about, it's taken me 20 years of finessing to try to convey what is it that we do in a nutshell that most people understand. Not just people who are in it, they get it right away.
Right.
But how do we get the majority to understand when you say, what is it that you do? They're like, huh?
Multicultural, what?
Exactly. Like real multicultural, not different races of people. Right. Like multiculturalism. But they stop and trying to figure out the messaging to make them stop, to make them understand what it is, it's taken a while to get there. So having that understanding and being able to paint a picture that hopefully isn't just put on top of your picture. That is what I was trying to cultivate all that time. How do I get you to really see the picture that I'm painting, not your picture, and then you just stuck me in it?
Right.
Right? Or stuck someone else in it. How do you really visualize this world so you can understand what people who have experiences that are different than yours may be experiencing?
And it's interesting that you say that, because I saw a post online that said, with empathy, you have to be able to see things as the person sees it, not how you want to see it based on what they're explaining. I'm like, that's kind of deep.
And I think that's the most difficult part, because people who grow up with many dimensions and a different viewpoint and having seen lots of different ways to be have a lot of empathy and a lot of understanding for a very broad scope of experiences.
Yeah.
And people who haven't grown up that way, that's not to say that you can't, because very empathetic people can come from anywhere. But if you haven't grown up with a broad stroke, it's very difficult to see outside of the blinders that you're used to.
That's so true.
So, okay. Well, we didn't really delve into how you grew up, but we're going to do that next time.
I am thinking about this on such a deeper level.
I know, right?
It's just even being, first generation, there's things I'm realizing that I'm even oblivious to.
Well, but I think because, like I said, before I found this book, I didn't really pay attention to this stuff. I don't want to say that I suppressed it, but it just was, And then after reading the book, you start to really consider all the things that are part of your life and what it looks like versus how, let's say, life in the United States looks, or whatever the case may be, or life in South Florida looks. And even, it's interesting how people see the U.S. because South Florida is different than North Florida, right? But everybody lumps the United States is like this. Is it really? Right. Is it really? So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
We are going to pick this back up and talk about how you grew up in another segment.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Always
I look
a pleasure.
forward to it. Yeah.